The first time my stepdaughter looked me in the eyes and said, "You're not my mom," I smiled anyway. We were standing in the kitchen of our home in Austin, Texas, packing her lunch for her first day at Westlake High School. Maya was 14, a brilliant girl with her late mother's hazel eyes and a sharp, defensive edge that she wore like armor. Her mom had passed away from cancer 4 years earlier, and though my husband, David, and I had been married for a year, I knew I was still a guest in her grief. I didn't expect her to call me Mom. I just wanted her to let me care. "I know, sweetie," I said, keeping my voice gentle as I tucked a small, handwritten note into her paper bag. "I'm just Chloe. But I'm here." She didn't say anything. She just grabbed the bag, crumpled the top with unnecessary force, and walked out to David's truck. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my apron, telling myself to be patient. I'd read all the books on blended families. I knew the statistics. I knew that teenage girls bore the heaviest emotional burden when a parent remarried. David and I had dated for 2 years before tying the knot, and during that time, Maya had been quiet but polite. We'd gone to Target together, baked cookies, and shared awkward but sweet conversations about her favorite books. But the moment the wedding rings went on, a switch flipped. It started with small things. She stopped eating the dinners I cooked, claiming she wasn't hungry, only to order DoorDash to her room an hour later. If David was in the room, she was bright and talkative, laughing at his jokes and leaning into his hugs. The second he stepped out to take a work call, the room temperature would drop to freezing. She wouldn't look at me. She would sigh heavily if I spoke, or simply pretend I hadn't opened my mouth at all. "She's just adjusting, Chloe," David told me one night in our bedroom, his face etched with the exhaustion of a man trying to balance 2 worlds. "She misses her mom, especially now that she's starting high school. Give her time." I loved David for how much he loved her. He was a good dad, a software engineer who worked late hours just to afford the therapy sessions and tutoring Maya needed. I didn't want to add to his stress, so I nodded, pressed a kiss to his cheek, and promised to try harder. The next weekend, I decided to surprise her. Maya was a talented artist, her room overflowing with sketchbooks. I spent hours researching the best art supply store in downtown Austin, bought a beautiful, high-end set of pastel markers she'd been eyeing online, and left them on her desk with a note saying how proud I was of her recent report card. An hour later, I went upstairs to do the laundry. As I walked past her bedroom, I noticed her door was cracked open. I paused, hoping to hear a gasp of excitement or see her testing out the colors. Instead, I saw Maya standing by her trash can. She was methodically unwrapping the markers, dropping them into the garbage one by one. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold wave of shock washing over me. I wanted to step inside, to ask her why she hated me so much, but I froze. She wasn't angry. She looked incredibly sad, staring at the empty box as if it represented a threat she couldn't outrun. Then, she noticed my shadow in the doorway. She didn't flinch. She just looked up, her expression hardening into absolute defiance, and reached for the final marker. But what she said next made my blood run cold. "If you think you can buy my dad's love, you're wrong," Maya said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut sharper than a shout. "And if you tell him about this, I'll tell him you threw them away just to make me look bad." I stood there, completely paralyzed by the sheer calculation in her eyes. This wasn't just a grieving teenager throwing a tantrum. This was strategic. I swallowed the lump in my throat, closed her door gently without saying a word, and walked down the stairs, my hands shaking. I didn't tell David. I couldn't bring myself to break his heart, or worse, risk him thinking I was exaggerating a conflict with a grieving child. I chose silence, believing it was the mature, adult thing to do. I convinced myself that if I just kept showing up, kept being the steady, calm presence she needed, she would eventually see that I wasn't trying to erase her mother. By the time November rolled around, things seemed to settle into a tense but manageable routine. Thanksgiving was approaching, and in our house, that meant the annual family dinner with David's extended family. I spent 3 days prepping the meal, making my grandmother's famous cornbread dressing and a custom pumpkin chiffon pie. When David's sister, Aunt Sarah, arrived from Houston, the house filled with noise and laughter. Sarah had always been close to Maya, acting as her emotional anchor after her mother passed. During dessert, Sarah took a bite of the pie and smiled warmly at me. "Chloe, this is absolutely incredible. You really outdid yourself." Before I could thank her, Maya chimed in from the end of the table. "Yeah, Chloe spent all week practicing it. She was really stressed because she knows she's not a natural cook like Mom was." The table went completely silent. David looked up, his fork hovering in mid-air, a flash of discomfort crossing his face. Sarah's smile faltered. "Maya," David said, his voice laced with warning. "That's not polite." "What?" Maya asked, her eyes wide with total innocence. "I was giving her a compliment. I just meant she worked really hard to make it perfect for us, even though it doesn't taste exactly like Mom's." She looked directly at me, a sweet, apologetic smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. The manipulation was flawless. To everyone else, she was just an honest kid clumsily navigating her grief. To me, it was a perfectly placed dagger. If you've ever struggled to find your place in a blended family, let me know in the comments how you handled it. That night, after everyone had left, I was cleaning up the kitchen when I realized I'd left my phone on the back patio. As I stepped out into the cool Texas evening air, I heard voices coming from the side yard. Maya and Sarah were sitting on the bench near the fire pit. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but my own name caught my attention. "She's just trying too hard, Aunt Sarah," Maya was saying, her voice cracking with genuine emotion. "Every time Dad looks at her, I feel like he's forgetting Mom. And she keeps changing things in the house. She even tried to throw away Mom's old baking pans." My breath caught in my throat. I had never touched those pans. They were safely stored in the top cabinet, exactly where David had left them. Sarah sighed, rubbing Maya's back. "Oh, sweetie. I know it's hard. Your dad deserves to be happy, but Chloe needs to respect the history here. Don't worry, I'll talk to your father." A cold dread pooled in my stomach. Maya wasn't just acting out at home anymore. She was actively constructing a narrative to turn David's entire family against me. I stepped back into the house, my mind racing. I realized that my patience was being weaponized against me, and if I didn't speak up soon, I was going to lose my husband. The next morning, David woke up early to go to the office. As he was grabbing his keys, he didn't give me his usual morning kiss. He just looked at me with a heavy, conflicted expression. "Chloe, we need to talk tonight," he said quietly. Sarah called me on her drive back to Houston. The entire day felt like a slow-motion countdown. I tried to focus on my freelance design work, but my eyes kept drifting to the empty spaces in our living room. Every photograph of David and his late wife was still exactly where it belonged. I had gone out of my way to ensure her memory was respected, yet I was being painted as the wicked stepmother trying to erase the past. When David's truck pulled into the driveway at 6 o'clock, my chest tightened. He walked into the kitchen, dropping his briefcase on the island. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deepened by a weight he shouldn't have had to carry. I poured him a glass of water and stood across from him, waiting. "Sarah told me about her conversation with Maya," David began, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Chloe, did you try to throw away Elena's baking pans?" No, David, I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible despite the panic rising in my throat. They are in the top cabinet above the pantry. I haven't moved them since the day I moved in. David sighed, looking down at his glass. Sarah said Maya was sobbing. She feels like she's walking on eggshells in her own home. She thinks you're trying to force her to forget her mom. And what about how she treats me? I asked, the hurt finally cracking through my calm exterior. David, she threw away the art supplies I bought her. One by one, into the trash, right in front of me. She threatened to lie to you if I told you. David looked up, his expression a mix of disbelief and defensiveness. Maya did that? Chloe, she's a quiet kid. She's never lied to me in her life. Are you sure you didn't misinterpret what happened? That statement felt like a physical blow. Are you sure you didn't misinterpret? In that single phrase, I realized how deep the fracture ran. Maya had spent 4 years building an unbreakable bond of sympathy with her father. I was the newcomer. My words carried no weight against the ghost of their shared tragedy. I know what I saw, I said quietly, the sting of his distrust bringing tears to my eyes. I am trying so hard, David. But I am fighting an enemy who plays the victim perfectly. She's not your enemy, Chloe. She's my daughter. David's voice snapped, louder than he intended. The silence that followed was suffocating. He looked regretful immediately, reaching across the counter to touch my hand, but I pulled away. We had never yelled at each other before. The wedge Maya was driving between us was working, and the terrifying part was that David couldn't see the hammer in her hand. Before David could apologize, we heard footsteps on the stairs. Maya stood in the kitchen doorway, her eyes darting between the two of us. She looked small, vulnerable, holding an old sweater of her mother's tight against her chest. Is everything okay? She asked softly, her voice trembling just enough to trigger David's protective instincts. I heard shouting. David immediately softened, stepping away from me and moving toward her. Everything's fine, Bug. Just an adult conversation. Go back up and finish your homework. She nodded, but right before she turned around, her eyes locked onto mine over David's shoulder. The vulnerability vanished. There was a cold, triumphant gleam in her eyes, a silent confirmation that she had won this round. She knew she had made her father choose a side, and it wasn't mine. That night, David slept on the far edge of the bed, his back turned to me. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering if our marriage would even survive the year. 2 weeks later, the school guidance counselor called our house, requesting an urgent meeting with both David and me regarding Maya's sudden drop in grades and behavioral changes at Westlake High. I thought this would finally be the moment we got to the bottom of her pain. But what the counselor revealed during that meeting changed everything. The guidance counselor's office smelled of old books and lavender, a quiet sanctuary that felt entirely at odds with the storm brewing in my chest. David sat next to me, his fingers nervously tapping against his knee. Mrs. Harrison, a kind-faced woman with silver hair, closed the manila folder on her desk and looked at us gently. Thank you both for coming. Maya has always been an honors student, which is why her recent performance is raising some red flags. She's failing junior year English, and her art teacher says she hasn't turned in a project in 3 weeks. David blinked, completely blindsided. Failing? She told me last night her grades were fine. Maya loves art. She's always sketching. She's also skipped 3 afternoon periods this month, Mrs. Harrison continued, her eyes shifting toward me with a look I couldn't quite decipher. When I sat down with her yesterday to ask what was going on, she broke down. She mentioned that things had become very tense at home since the remarriage. My heart stopped. She feels isolated, Mrs. Harrison said, choosing her words carefully. She told me she spends most of her time locked in her room because she doesn't feel welcome in the common areas anymore. She mentioned that her stepmother has been systematically replacing her mother's things, which has made it very difficult for her to focus on school. The air left my lungs. The manipulation had left our house. Maya was now broadcasting this manufactured version of me to mandatory reporters, effectively building a case that I was emotionally neglecting her. "That's completely untrue," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "I have never made her feel unwelcome. I have spent the last year trying to give her space while showing her nothing but support." "Chloe, please," David interrupted, his voice tight. He turned to the counselor. "We've been having some growing pains at home, Mrs. Harrison. I didn't realize it was affecting her schoolwork this badly. I'll talk to her." "I think family counseling might be a good step," Mrs. Harrison suggested warmly. During the entire drive home, the silence in the truck was deafening. David stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his cheek twitched. I looked out the window at the passing Austin traffic, feeling an overwhelming sense of loneliness. I was being erased from my own marriage, transformed into a villain by a teenager's calculated lies. When we got home, David didn't even take off his jacket. He walked straight into the living room and called Maya down. She descended the stairs slowly, wearing an oversized hoodie, looking like the picture of teenage innocence. She saw the grim expressions on our faces and immediately dropped her head. "We just left the school, Maya," David said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Why did you lie to me about your grades? And why are you telling your counselor that Chloe is making you feel unwelcome?" Maya's shoulders began to shake. She sank into the armchair, covering her face with her hands. "Because it's true," she sobbed. "You don't see how she looks at me when you're not here, Dad. She hates that I look like Mom. She wants me gone." "Maya, look at me," I said, stepping forward, unable to take the fabrications any longer. "I have never, ever wanted you gone. I have tried to love you. Why are you doing this to our family? Stop it." Maya screamed, looking up with tears streaming down her face. "Just stop pretending. You don't care about me." David stepped between us, his back to me, effectively blocking me out. "Chloe, just back off for a second. Can't you see she's hyperventilating?" He knelt in front of his daughter, taking her hands. "Hey, bug. Look at me. Nobody is forcing you out. I promise." I stood there, completely pushed to the periphery of my own home. I realized then that as long as I stayed in the room, Maya would keep playing the victim, and David would keep enabling it out of guilt. Without a word, I turned around and walked out of the house. I got into my car and drove down to a quiet park near Lady Bird Lake, watching the water ripple under the sunset, crying until my ribs ached. If you enjoy emotional real-life stories, don't forget to subscribe. I stayed out for hours, giving them space, letting the dust settle. When I finally returned home after dark, the house was completely dark except for a single light in the kitchen. David was sitting at the island, a stack of papers spread out in front of him. He didn't look up when I walked in. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on a notebook that looked incredibly familiar. It was Maya's private journal, the one she kept hidden in her nightstand. "David?" I whispered, sensing a sudden shift in the atmosphere. He finally looked up at me, and for the first time in months, the defensiveness in his eyes was gone. Instead, they were filled with absolute horror. "Chloe," he choked out, his voice breaking. "You need to see what she's been writing." I walked over to the kitchen island, my boots clicking softly against the hardwood. David looked completely undone, his hands trembling as he pushed the open notebook toward me. I hesitated. I had always respected boundaries, and reading a teenager's private thoughts felt like crossing a line we couldn't walk back from. "David, I shouldn't read her journal," I whispered. "It's not a journal, Chloe," David said, his voice hollow, cracking under the weight of a sudden, brutal realization. "Just look at it. Please." I lowered my eyes to the page. It wasn't a diary filled with teenage angst or emotional venting. It was a structured, meticulously organized notebook. At the top of the page, in Maya's neat cursive, were the words, Phase 3, the school. Beneath it was a bulleted list of talking points. Tell Mrs. Harrison about the baking pans. Mention feeling unsafe in the kitchen. Cry when asked about grades. Blame the environment. Make sure Dad hears the argument. My breath hitched. I flipped back a few pages. There were columns, timelines, and notes analyzing David's emotional triggers. Dad feels guilty when I wear Mom's old clothes. Use the gray sweater when discussing Chloe. There were even notes about how to phrase comments at the Thanksgiving dinner table to make them sound accidental. This wasn't a girl acting out in grief. This was a blueprint. She left it on the coffee table, David said, staring blankly at the wall. She must have forgotten to put it in her backpack before she went to sleep. I picked it up to put it away, and I saw your name, Chloe. I saw what she wrote about the markers. He looked up at me, his eyes swimming with tears, filled with an agony that broke my heart. You were telling the truth. She threw them away. She planned all of it. My own daughter has been gaslighting me for a year. I closed the notebook, the heavy cardboard cover making a dull thud in the quiet kitchen. I didn't feel a surge of victory. I didn't feel the urge to say I told you so. I just felt a profound, aching sadness for both of them. Why, David? I asked, sitting down on the bar stool next to him. Why would she go to this length just to make me look bad? Because of me, David choked out, burying his face in his hands. Because every time she looked at us being happy, she felt like she was betraying Elena. And I was so consumed by my own guilt for moving on that I let her weaponize it. I didn't set boundaries. I made her think she had to fight for my love. I reached out, placing my hand over his shaking shoulders. He leaned into me, crying quietly, apologizing over and over again for not believing me, for pushing me away, for failing as a husband and a father. I held him, letting the storm pass, knowing that the hardest part was still ahead of us. The truth was finally out, but the illusion was shattered. What do we do now? I asked quietly. David wiped his face, his expression hardening into something firm, the protective father finally realizing that protection meant stopping the damage his child was causing. We don't confront her tonight. We wait until tomorrow morning. Together. The rest of the night passed in a tense, watchful silence. Sleep was impossible. We lay in bed holding hands, two people standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the sun to rise. At 7 the next morning, we sat at the kitchen island. The notebook was placed right in the center of the dark quartz countertop. We heard Maya's door open upstairs. Her light, familiar footsteps came down the steps, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She walked into the kitchen, reaching for the refrigerator handle, completely unaware that the world she had built had collapsed overnight. "Morning, Dad," she said naturally. Then, her eyes dropped to the counter. She saw the notebook. She froze, her hands still gripping the refrigerator door, the color completely draining from her face until she looked like a ghost. The kitchen became so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Maya's hand slowly dropped from the handle, her fingers trembling as she stared at the notebook. The confident, untouchable posture she had carried for months completely collapsed. In its place stood a terrified 14-year-old girl who had been caught in a lie too big to fix. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking, her eyes darting to David with absolute panic. "I can explain. It's just a creative writing project. I was writing a story." It was a desperate defense, the last reflex of a cornered child. David didn't shout. He didn't slam his hand on the counter. He just looked at her, his eyes heavy with a profound disappointment that was far more devastating than anger. "Don't, Maya," David said quietly, his voice breaking. "Please don't lie to me anymore. I read it. I read all of it. The markers, the Thanksgiving dinner, the counseling meeting, you planned it all out to make Chloe look like a monster." A heavy tear spilled over Maya's eyelashes, tracking down her pale cheek. She looked at me, then back at her father, realizing that the protective wall of guilt she had manipulated for a year had completely vanished. "She's trying to take Mom's place." Maya suddenly screamed, the tears flowing freely now as she let go of her backpack, letting it thud against the floor. "You love her more than you love Mom. You're forgetting her, and she wants me gone so you can start a new family." The raw, unfiltered grief in her voice was heartbreaking. It was exactly what the counselor had warned us about, but packaged in a dangerous, destructive behavior. I sat still, resisting the urge to defend myself, letting her speak. David stood up from the bar stool and walked around the island. I expected him to pull her into a tight hug, to comfort her like he always did when she cried. Instead, he stopped a few feet away, establishing a physical boundary that hadn't been there before. "Chloe has never tried to replace your mother, Maya," David said, his tone firm, unwavering. "I love your mother, and I will always miss her. But Chloe is my wife. She has done nothing but try to love you, support you, and give you space. And you tried to destroy her reputation. You tried to destroy our marriage." Maya sobbed, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. "I'm sorry. Dad, I'm sorry, please don't hate me." "I don't hate you, Bug," David said, his voice softening just a fraction, though his posture remained strict. "But things are going to change. Today, you are going to school, and you are going to go straight to Mrs. Harrison's office. You are going to tell her the absolute truth about what you said yesterday." Maya looked up, her eyes wide with horror. "No, please, Dad, that's embarrassing. They'll think I'm crazy. You made a choice to damage Chloe's character to a mandatory reporter," David said, his voice final. "You are going to fix it. And when you come home, we are sitting down as a family to discuss the new rules in this house. No more locks on the door during the day, no more separate dinners, and you will be starting intensive family therapy with us next week." Maya stood there, completely stripped of her armor. She slowly picked up her backpack, refusing to look at either of us, and walked out the front door to catch the school bus. When the door clicked shut, the silence returned. David turned back to me, his chest heaving as he rubbed his face. He walked over, sinking into the chair next to me, and took both of my hands in his. "I am so sorry, Chloe," he whispered, pressing his forehead against my knuckles. "I let this happen. We are going to fix it, David," I said softly, pulling his face up so he could see my eyes. "But it's going to be a long road." We spent the rest of the morning talking, setting real boundaries for the first time, aligning ourselves as a team. For the first time in a year, I felt like a real partner in my own home. But when Maya came home from school later that afternoon, she didn't throw a tantrum, and she didn't apologize. Instead, she walked right past the kitchen, went up to her room, and locked herself inside. An hour later, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from an unknown number, and the message inside sent a whole new wave of anxiety through my chest. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the glowing screen. The text message was brief, but it sent a chill straight down my spine. Maya told me what David made her do today. How dare you force a grieving child to lie to save your own skin? Leave her alone, Chloe, or I will make sure the rest of the family knows exactly what you are. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering. I recognized the typing style immediately. It wasn't an unknown enemy. It was Aunt Sarah. Maya hadn't just been planning this in isolation. She had a confidant, an adult who was actively validating her distortions and feeding her resentment from afar. Maya had called her aunt in a panic right after leaving the counselor's office, spinning a brand new narrative where David and I had forced her to retract her statements under duress. I closed my eyes, taking a long, deep breath. The temptation to text Sarah back, to send screenshots of Maya's notebook and blast her with the truth, was overwhelming. Instead, I chose silence. I walked into the living room where David was sorting through bills at the desk. "David," I said, my voice calm but steady. "We have a bigger problem than we thought." I handed him the phone. As he read the text, I watched the confusion on his face turn into sharp, agonizing betrayal. Sarah wasn't just his sister, she was the person he had leaned on most when Elena died. To see her actively undermining his marriage and his daughter's healing was a devastating blow. "She doesn't know about the notebook," David said, his voice barely audible. He looked up at me, his eyes clear and resolved. "Sarah thinks she's protecting Elena's legacy. But she's destroying my daughter." He picked up his phone and dialed Sarah's number, putting it on speakerphone right there on the coffee table. It rang twice before Sarah picked up, her voice instantly defensive. "David? If you're calling to defend Chloe, save your breath." Maya was sobbing on the phone. "You are letting that woman brainwash you into punishing your own flesh and blood." "Sarah, stop," David said. His voice was incredibly quiet, but it carried an authority I had never heard from him before. "I am going to text you a photo right now. I want you to open it, read it, and then I want you to listen to me." He snapped a clear picture of Phase 3, the school from Maya's notebook, and hit send. A heavy, suffocating silence hung over the speakerphone for a full 2 minutes. We could hear the faint sound of Sarah rustling papers on the other end as she opened the image. What is this?" Sarah finally asked, her tone shifting from aggressive to completely bewildered. "That is a script, Sarah," David said, his voice trembling with emotion. "That is a step-by-step plan Maya wrote to manipulate her school counselor, sabotage her own grades, and drive Chloe out of this house. She's been doing it for a year. And you just handed her the matches." "David, I had no idea," Sarah whispered, the defiance completely draining from her voice. "She told me, she made it sound like Chloe was erasing Elena. I thought I was doing the right thing for Elena's memory." "If you want to honor Elena, you will help me save her daughter," David said firmly. "Maya is hurting, but she is also hurting others, and it stops today. I love you, Sarah, but if you feed into her manipulations one more time, you will not be welcome in our home." Before Sarah could respond, David hung up the phone. He looked at me, completely exhausted but entirely present. There was no more division between us. We were standing on the same side of the line. The next evening, the three of us sat in the office of Dr. Marcus, a family therapist specializing in adolescent trauma and blended families. Maya sat on the far end of the couch, her arms tightly crossed, staring stubbornly at the floor. Dr. Marcus looked at Maya, then at the notebook sitting on the coffee table between us. "Maya," the therapist said gently. "Writing things down is a powerful tool. But it looks like you've been using your writing to build a wall to keep everyone out. Do you want to talk about what happens if that wall falls down?" Maya didn't answer. She just bit her lower lip, fighting back tears, clinging to the last remnants of her anger. But what happened halfway through that session changed the trajectory of our family forever. Dr. Marcus let the silence sit in the room, refusing to rush her. He turned his gaze from Maya and looked directly at me. "Chloe, how did it feel when you saw what was written in that notebook?" I looked at Maya. She was still staring at the floor, her jaw clenched, bracing herself for the lecture she thought was coming. "I didn't feel angry, Maya," I said softly, my voice carrying the absolute truth of my heart. "I just felt incredibly sad. Because I realized how exhausted you must be. Spending every single day planning, calculating, and fighting a war against me when nobody was fighting against you, that must be so incredibly lonely." Maya's jaw slackened. Her eyes finally snapped up from the floor, locking onto mine. She expected accusations, punishment, or a lecture on respect. She didn't expect empathy. "I don't want to take your mother's place," I continued, the tears finally welling in my own eyes. "I never have. I lost my own father when I was young, Maya. I know that the empty space they leave behind never goes away. I don't want to fill Elena's space. I just wanted to build a small, new space right next to it. For me. To love you." A sharp, ragged sob tore from Maya's throat. The wall she had built over the course of a year didn't just crack, it completely shattered. She pulled her knees up to her chest, buried her face in her arms, and began to cry with a raw, agonizing intensity that we had never seen before. David immediately moved across the couch, pulling her into his arms. This time, he didn't look at me with guilt or defensiveness. He looked at me with gratitude. Maya clung to his shirt, her voice breaking as the years of buried grief and fear finally poured out of her. I thought if I liked her, it meant I was forgetting Mom," Maya sobbed, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "Everyone kept telling me how much I looked like Mom, and I thought if I let Chloe pack my lunch or buy me things, I was erasing her. I was so scared, Dad. I didn't know how to make it stop." David held her tight, rocking her gently. "Oh, Bug. Loving Chloe doesn't change how much we love Mom. There's enough room in our hearts for both. I promise you." Dr. Marcus watched them quietly, then gave me a small, encouraging nod. The breakthrough wasn't a magic cure, but it was the first time we were all speaking the same language. The months that followed were not easy. Healing is a slow, messy process, not a sudden transformation. We kept our commitment to therapy, attending sessions every single week. Maya began the hard work of pulling up her grades, and she voluntarily walked into the art supply store downtown with David to buy a new set of markers, utilizing them to express her real feelings rather than her anger. Aunt Sarah called a few weeks later, offering a sincere, tearful apology to both David and me. She realized her own grief had blinded her, and she committed to supporting our family as a unified front. By the time May rolled around, the heavy, freezing fog that had choked our home had completely melted away. One Saturday morning, I was sitting at the kitchen island, sipping a cup of coffee, when I heard Maya's door open upstairs. She came down the steps wearing a bright yellow t-shirt, her hair tied up in a messy bun. She walked into the kitchen, grabbed an apple from the counter, and paused. If you've enjoyed this journey of emotional healing and real-life drama, please don't forget to subscribe. She looked at me, her hazel eyes clear, peaceful, and entirely devoid of the calculation that used to live there. "Hey, Chloe," she said naturally. "Yeah, sweetie?" I asked, turning around. "I have an art showcase at the high school next Friday," she said, shifting her weight from foot to foot, a little nervous but entirely genuine. "My main piece got accepted. I really want you and Dad to be there." Together. A warmth spread through my chest, deep and true. I smiled, and this time, it wasn't a smile of patience or survival. It was a smile of pure relief. We wouldn't miss it for the world, Maya, I replied. Looking back at the painful year we left behind, I realized that family isn't something that just happens when you sign a marriage license. It is something you fight for, day after day, through the misunderstandings, the silence, and the tears. Healing begins when people choose honesty over pride. Love cannot be forced, but kindness should never stop, because sometimes, the people who push you away the hardest are the ones who need to know you're not going anywhere.